Hello, this is Geotech and today I'll be talking about Richard Stallman and his return to the Free Software Foundation. A lot of people in the open source community are upset that he's returned due to some controversial statements he made almost 2 years ago. In some leaked emails, Richard Stallman made some comments about Epstein's sex trafficking victim, and she accused Marvin Minsky of sexual assault. And so I'm going to be analyzing Richard Stallman's comments in those emails, in addition to other comments he's made in the past regarding relationships between children and adults. So let's take a look. If you're enjoying my content, you can subscribe to me on YouTube, PeerTube, and follow me on Odyssey. You can also support me on LiberaPay, Patreon, and by shopping at Earth Hero. See links in the description below. I wanted to start this with the RMS open letter that's been published on GitHub. So this is an open letter to remove Richard Stallman from all leadership positions. They go on to state that he has shown himself to be misogynist, ableist, and transphobic, among other serious accusations of impropriety. These sort of beliefs have no place in the free software, digital rights, and tech communities. We are calling for the removal of the entire board of the Free Software Foundation. These are people who have enabled and empowered RMS for years. They demonstrate this again by permitting him to rejoin the FSF board. There are a lot of prominent people in various open source organizations like GNOME Foundation, Debian, OSI, Apache. You can go on to see the entire list of people that have gone ahead and signed it here. And then here they share in the bottom, some of us have our own stories about RMS and our interactions with him, things that are not captured in email threads or on video. We hope you will read what has been shared and consider the harm he has done to our community and others. So okay, that's where we're gonna go next. And this is gonna document a lot of the things he said and essentially gonna state the reasons why they believe he should step down. I'm going to read these first paragraphs here. RMS has a history of mistreating women and making them feel uncomfortable, unsafe, and unwelcome. For incidents relating to RMS and MIT, please see, and then they share a link here. RMS views on rape and child sex loss were publicly discussed in the fall of 2019 when Selim G wrote about them. Let's actually go directly to those emails because this paragraph focuses on those emails. Let's go and see what exactly Richard Stallman said. So this is where the email thread starts. To put this email into context, Marvin Minsky, an MIT professor who is known as an AI pioneer, was accused of assaulting one of Epstein's victims. And Richard Stallman is exchanging emails with another fellow colleague. And this is what he says. The announcement of the Friday event does an injustice to Marvin Minsky. Deceased AI pioneer Marvin Minsky, who is accused of assaulting one of Epstein's victims, he quotes, "The injustice is in the word assaulting. The term sexual assault is so vague and slippery that it facilitates accusation inflation, taking claims that someone did X and leading people to think of it as Y, which is much worse than X. The accusation quoted is a clear example of inflation. The reference reports the claim that Minsky had sex with one of Epstein's harem. Let's presume that was true. I see no reason to disbelieve it. The word assaulting presumes that he applied force or violence in some unspecified way, but the article itself says no such thing, only that they had sex. We can imagine many scenarios, but the most plausible scenario is that she presented herself to him as entirely willing. Assuming she was being coerced by Epstein, he would have had every reason to tell her to conceal that from most of his associates. I've concluded from various examples of accusation inflation that it is absolutely wrong to use the term sexual assault in an accusation. Whatever conduct you want to criticize, you should describe it with a specific term that avoids moral vagueness about the nature of the criticism." In other email exchanges, he also goes on to question whether the victim is claiming that she was directed to have sex, whether any sex took place at all. He says, "All I know," she said about Minsky, "is that Epstein directed her to have sex with Minsky. That does not say whether Minsky knew that she was coerced. It does not report what each said and did during their sexual encounter. We can imagine various scenarios. We know that Geoffrey was being coerced into sex by Epstein. She was being harmed. but the details do affect whether and to what extent Minsky was responsible for that. So if you read these emails and don't believe Richard Stallman said anything wrong here, I think you conclude that for two reasons. First of all, it does seem that he acknowledges that Epstein did coerce the victim, so Stallman wasn't defending Epstein, and that based on the emails, Richard Stallman seems like he's just concerned about being precise with the accusation, and so you don't think Stallman said anything wrong. But if you look at this paragraph here, assuming she was being coerced by Epstein, he would have had every reason to tell her to conceal that from most of his associates. There he's making an assumption. We can imagine many scenarios, but the most plausible scenario is that she presented herself to him as entirely willing. So even though he acknowledges that Epstein caused harm to that victim, I'm not sure why he assumes that Epstein told the victim to present herself as willing, and assuming that he had every reason to tell her to conceal that from his associates. I think this is the part where it comes across as insensitive to state this, and I think this could be hurtful to the victim and other children that have been victims of sex trafficking. But if you only focus on these emails, you miss the other part of the concern with Richard Stallman's statements. So if you go to Richard Stallman's website, in June 5, 2006, he said, "Dutch pedophiles have formed a political party to campaign for legalization. I am skeptical of the claim that voluntarily pedophilia harms children. The arguments that it causes harm seem to be based on cases which aren't voluntary, which are then stretched by parents who are horrified by the idea that their little baby is maturing." It's a very strong statement there, but there's more. If you go back to his website, in January 4th, 2013, he reiterates this point. "There's little evidence to justify the widespread assumption that willing participation in pedophilia hurts children. Granted, children may not dare say no to an older relative or may not realize they could say no. In that case, even if they do not overtly object, the relationship may still feel imposed to them. That's not willing participation, it's imposed participation, a different issue." So now if you read these two statements, his comments on the email thread are a lot worse. Let me look at this article that he cites. This article from The Guardian talks about how the National Council for Civil Liberties was making the argument that childhood sexual experiences willingly engaged in with an adult result in no identifiable damage. The real need is a change in the attitude which assumes that all cases of pedophilia result in lasting damage. It goes on to cite some researchers and some academics that are reporting that they haven't found any harm when a child voluntarily engages in a sexual relationship with an adult, although other academics dispute that. Two eminent researchers testified to that effect to a Canadian parliamentary commission last year, and the Harvard Mental Health Letter of July 2010 stated boldly that pedophilia is a sexual orientation and therefore unlikely to change. Now, here's my issue. It may be possible that a young child has a sexual relationship with an adult and causes no harm to them. But we got to be careful with that line of thinking, because I think a lot of people will take that and use it to justify either, lowering the age of consent or getting rid of it altogether. But I think that's a flawed way of looking at it, because just because there might be some cases where a child is not harmed by an relationship with an adult doesn't mean that that's going to be the case for the majority of relationships and encounters. So now when you take a look at the broader picture, how Stallman feels about pedophilia, what he said in those emails, it does appear that he has very terrible ideas, and ideas that I think harm and hurt people, especially victims of child sex trafficking. And I think that warrants him stepping down from his position. He's a public figure, and I think you are responsible for what you say and what you do, because your action and the things you say can influence others and can harm others. Now, it seemed that shortly after when he first stepped down, he wrote this on his website. "Many years ago, I posted that I could not see anything wrong about sex between an adult and a child if the child accepted it. Through personal conversations in recent years, I've learned to understand how sex with a child can harm her or her psychologically. This changed my mind about the matter. I think adults should not do that. I am grateful for the conversations that enabled me to understand why. Now, it seems like he tried to apologize and walk back on his views. This post that he made on his website is not very convincing, because I would have loved to see what caused him to change his mind and to go into further detail. But he didn't do that here, so I don't know if he truly believes that, and maybe he's just saying it to sort of take cover for the flack he's taking for it. Now, there is an open letter in support of RMS. Richard Stallman, frequently known as RMS, has been a driving force in the free software movement for decades, with contributions including the GNU operating system and EMAC. I mean, it is true, Richard Stallman has done a lot of good for open source. No dispute there. Even the critics of RMS acknowledge that. One interesting thing they say here, historically, RMS has been expressing his views in ways that upset many people. He is usually more focused on the philosophical underpinnings and pursuing the objective truth and linguistic purism, while underemphasizing people's feelings on matters he's commenting on. This makes his arguments vulnerable to misunderstanding and misrepresentation, something which we feel is happening in the open letter calling for his removal. His words need to be interpreted in this context and taking into account that, more often than not, he is not looking to put things diplomatically. I can partially agree with this, that maybe he is focusing on linguistic purism in his comments, but again, if you take a look at the broader context and his past behaviors and past things he said on his website, I think there's a lot more than just linguistic purism there. To summarize, I think what Richard Stallman said in those emails was terrible and harmful, especially when you look at the broader context of what he said and done in the past. Therefore, I think he should step down from the Free Software Foundation. But I can acknowledge that he's done a lot of good for the open source movement, and he should be given an opportunity to make amends. As to what exactly will be enough, that's hard to say. It's very subjective, but I think he can start by partnering up with some nonprofits and organizations that support victims of child sex trafficking and educate himself about their experiences. But let me know what you think. Do you think that Richard Stallman said anything wrong in those emails? Do you think that he should step down or resign? Do you think Richard Stallman should be allowed to make amends for his past comments? Or do you think that he should never return to any leadership position? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like my video, please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.